Navarro and I did a piece on Bannon's War Room 2 Saturdays ago, in which we laid out an alternative strategy. And I can tell you that I mentioned last week, in last week's Saturday's presentation, that I had a phone call from this GS-15 colleague of mine in the Department of Defense, talked to me for about an hour and a half, gave me some messaging that I wasn't supposed to talk about certain things anymore, having to do with China and the origin of the virus. He said that we have no strategy. It is a day-to-day, you know, they're making decisions on the fly, and it's the problem with this. So Peter and I came up with a strategy. And it turns out that that's now starting to be accepted across the world. We're going to get a clip at the very end of that. Our strategy basically comes down to this. If we continue to do universal vaccination and worldwide vaccination, what we're doing is we're training the virus to escape those vaccines. What we're doing is evolving the virus. The virus and the selective pressure for the mutant strains is coming from the vaccinated. So all this storyline that the unvaccinated are responsible is bunk. It fails basic, you know, Darwinian evolution. It's the vaccinated that are driving the emergence of the escape mutants. And all of our immune systems are being trained to a single antigen. What that means is that, and now we know that both innate and adaptive immune systems can be trained. And we're training all of our immune systems to focus on a common antigen. And the virus, in response, is evolving to escape that selection. The prediction from Gert van den Bosch, who I used to work with at Solvay on our influenza project, a great Dutch virologist, and I'm convinced, I'm compelled by his logic, is that we're going to have escape mutants that become increasingly refined to the point where they're able to overcome any of these adaptive immune responses focused on the spike. And how can that happen? Glycosylation. As you know, the spike is heavily glycosylated. There's a bunch of ways that this can happen. But it seems to be happening. We're evolving viruses that are escape mutants. They will continue to converge on a common escape mutant, and then we're going to have a problem, because all of our immune systems are going to be trained to a common endpoint, and that virus will overcome that common endpoint, and then it's as if there was no vaccine at all. And the other bear in the woods, by the way, is antibody-dependent enhancement. We're not going to go there, but the data coming out of Israel right now are suggesting that that may be happening also. So our strategy that we're suggesting be considered is basically the strategy of Sweden, which, by the way, the other day got to 0 deaths. So the strategy is to vaccinate the people that are highly susceptible, that are at high risk for disease. Those are the ones that need our vaccine globally. Okay, we've got to protect our elders from death, and they are highly susceptible to death. And they're probably going to need to be revaccinated every 6 months, and that is it's a great deal if you're Pfizer, but it's the current state of affairs. We're going to have to let the virus circulate in the rest of the population so that it has natural drift but not selected evolution. And we have to support that with early drug treatment. Now, Tony last week, after Peter and I came out with our piece in the Washington Times, gave a talk at a think tank in DC in which he suddenly turned around and said, hey, we're going to have to focus on making COVID like the common cold and coming up with drugs for early treatment. Unfortunately, the drugs that he focused on were antivirals and drugs in development from large pharmaceuticals that are under patent. So I'm going to walk you through carefully the next few slides that kind of show where we're at with the noble line. Next slide. These are CDC slides if they're so marked as CDC. This is the CDC deck selected about the Delta variant. Next slide. So on this axis, we're looking at infectiousness, or R naught. Everybody's an epidemiologist now. R naught is the baseline reproductive coefficient. So an R naught of 5 means that in a baseline environment, no masks, if I'm infected, I will on average infect 5 of you. That's an R naught of 5. The Alpha variant had an R naught of about 2.5. Delta has an R naught, like chickenpox, 8. Okay? It is highly, highly infectious, and lambda is more infectious. Fundamental principle of virology: over time, after a virus enters a new population, it tends to become more infectious and less pathogenic. That may or may not occur because we have the selective pressure of the vaccines. So, remember that. Now notice on this axis, the vertical axis is fatality scale. Notice that the CDC indicates that the delta is about the same as the ancestral strain. This is internal leaked CDC documents. So all of the press about how delta is so scary and it's going to kill all of us, wait till we get to those data. Next slide. Okay, I'm just going to highlight this one point. The risk of reinfection with delta may be higher compared to alpha, but only if your prior infection was greater than 100 days earlier. So what this is saying is the rate of reinfection. So this is saying that natural immunity protects for about 180 days, about half a year. There's other data suggesting otherwise, but this is the CDC's position, is that natural infection protects for about half a year. As is the case, just so happens, that is the durability, the lifetime of the Pfizer product is only about 6 months. Next slide. Breakthrough cases reported to national passive surveillance have a lower cycle time. A lot of you, everybody's now an expert on PCR. Okay, so lower cycles means that you've got a lot more nucleic acid, about 10 times the viral load for Delta compared to Alpha. There was an important outbreak in Barnstable County, Massachusetts, where almost all the people that were infected were previously vaccinated. So that kind of got everybody's attention. And here in the States, they showed there's no difference in mean cycle time values in vaccinated and unvaccinated cases. That means that the virus, if it infects you, if you have been vaccinated or unvaccinated, it replicates at about the same level, about 10 times higher than the alpha variant did. And by the way, it's equally infectious, so the transmissibility, if you're infected, even if you've been vaccinated, to a third party, to your children or your elders or whatever, is the same whether or not you've been vaccinated as whether you've been unvaccinated. Next slide. May cause more severe disease than alpha or ancestral strains. This is very limited evidence. This is CDC's deck. From what I'm seeing in the data, this is not true. Delta now increasingly is appearing to be not particularly pathogenic. Next slide. So dose effectiveness for Pfizer, you got to look at this carefully. These are different terms: confirmed infection, symptomatic disease, hospitalization. The Israeli data is often considered the best worldwide right now. That's got an interesting backstory. But for confirmed infection and symptomatic disease or hospitalization or death, the efficacy or effectiveness, that's the field effectiveness, is about 64% for confirmed infection or systematic disease if you've been vaccinated. Hospitalization or death, it seems to be more protective against hospitalization, vaccination against Delta. Death is another issue. Next slide. So what is herd immunity? I just wanted to throw this in. This is a lovely little piece. This is two different definitions from different times, and I'm sorry about the resolution from the World Health Organization. In the first panel, the World Health Organization is defining herd immunity as the indirect protection from an infectious disease that happens when a population is immune, either through vaccination or immunity developed through previous infection. The usual way that we get through to herd immunity is through natural infection. The second definition from the CDC, from a little bit later, is that herd immunity is also known as population immunity, a concept used for vaccination that is when a population can be protected from a certain virus if a threshold of vaccination is reached. So they've now kind of set goal lines that herd immunity can only be achieved through vaccination, which we know is false. Next slide. Can herd immunity be achieved with these vaccines? This is the CDC's own data. These are complicated graphs. These two represent, assuming that only 5% of the population has been infected, so that's natural immunity at 5%. The panels on the right assumes natural immunity of 35%, so 35% of the population has been infected and recovered. The upper line represents protection. The level here in the horizontal axis, this is different levels of vaccination coverage. So this is 100%. We've heard about everybody's got to take vaccine. That would be 70%. Remember, that was the goal for July 4th. Okay. 0.6 is about where we're at now. These are power curves about what it would take to get to 100% protection. So we would stop on the vertical axis, probability of increase. So 1 is that we continue to spread fully. 0.4 is that the probability of increase spread of delta is only 0.4, in this case 0.5. So that's that axis. This is vaccination coverage. This is the line as if there's no masking. This is masks unvaccinated only. This assumes everybody is really good at masking and 100% compliance. Now there's a key thing here. WHO did the calculation with an R naught of 5, but they've already told us the R naught is actually 8. This is more like where we're at, but even let's assume it's here. What their data shows, even at an R naught of 5, there is no way to stop the spread of Delta. Full stop. Even if we have 100% vaccine uptake, it will spread through the population. Next slide. And here's their admission. Given higher transmissibility and current vaccine coverage, universal masking is essential to reduce transmission of the Delta virus. It cannot stop it. Okay, so Delta virus will spread through our population. That's just the way things are. We don't have any choice. We have to get to drugs. Next slide. Breakthrough infections. This is CDC's own words. This is their stuff. Breakthrough infections may be as transmissible as unvaccinated cases, just what I said. More breakthrough and more community spread will happen despite vaccination, even if we had 100% vaccine uptake. Next slide. Now this is just some inside stuff having to do with latest data from Public Health England. And this is very much inside baseball. But the key thing here is if you look at those that received 2 doses versus unvaccinated, and you look at deaths within 28 days for age less than 50 and greater than or equal to 50. So these are very low numbers. This means the vaccine is protecting against death and hospitalization. Yay. Okay, from Delta. But the incidence of death and hospitalization for Delta in the UK is extremely low. However, there's a glitch in the data that's rather odd, which is that although only 13 deaths from those that received 2 doses, remember most of England is vaccinated, so you got to correct for that denominator. 48 in the unvaccinated, which is the smaller subset. However, 389 deaths in greater than 50, and only 205 in greater than 50. This has been consistent in the UK data. There's something very odd going on with death.
More deaths in the vaccinated.
More deaths in the vaccinated population, those that received 2 doses. Okay. Next slide. Is this really a severe outbreak? Jill pulled these yesterday from the UK data from World Meter. And you can see in the upper panel, this is the spike of cases, new cases. They do a fairly good job of surveillance compared to us. In the lower panel is daily deaths. A lot of new cases, very little death. Yay. Next slide. So, don't hear it from me. This is a very high-profile academic thought leader. By immunizing the elderly, we've provided them with excellent protection, also contributing as widespread natural immunity. Though cases may rise, deaths will no longer follow in proportion. So, there is good news here. I don't want to leave you with, just thinking that the world's going to come to an end and we're all going to die. Well, we did will, but it's, one cause or another. Some less than others. Next slide. So these are the policy options that Peter and I came up with. Next slide. Provide personal risk assessment tools. This is where Silicon Valley can really help. Okay, I know that these AI, ML based tools are out there. Wouldn't it be lovely if we could load them on our handhelds and get a personal risk assessment and make a decision about whether or not we need vaccination? The government could say our policy is that if your risk level is above 8.5, arbitrary number, then get thee to a vaccinologist. Otherwise, we're going to support you with clear and complete data on vaccine risks and with diagnostic tools so that you're able to quickly identify whether or not you're infected. That's key. The CDC has got to step up to the plate, not to do intensive surveillance of all of us with nasal swabs, but we need to have personal diagnostic devices so that we know if we're infected and we can rapidly get early intervention with the imperfect drugs that we have. They're still quite good.